All right, welcome everybody. Thanks for watching today. On the in the hot seat, I have Nathalie B. From well, how about if we start just briefly telling me what you do. I know that you've achieved master beekeeping certification, right? Just like my friend Angela. Like two friends that I have. So just tell me a little bit about yourself, and then I'm going to start grilling you with some questions.
That's okay. Okay, so I am in Austin, Texas. I work with a gentleman named Les Crowder, Be Mindful, and I've got my Texas A&M Master Beekeeper certification. I've been beekeeping for 10 years. I started with a warrior hive, a single hive that you will pick on me because I bought a package. I didn't know anything better, but I put it in the warrior hive and I never fed it and I never treated it, and it lived for 8 years. And I have another one that's about 8 years as well now in the warrior hive as well. Um, I'm a director for the Texas Beekeepers Association and the chairperson for the Real Texas Honey program. And what else can I tell you? I've been keeping bees in Texas for about 10 years, and I've been to Africa for about 6 months to do a program in the Congo, where I was hired by the Congolese government to design and lead their beekeeping training program for the trade schools. And I do a lot of community outreach. My passion is treatment free beekeeping and with a focus on tabar hives. But we do all kinds of hives.
Okay, yeah, that's awesome, man. Wow, it's like that's a lot. That's a lot. That's a lot to have on your plate at all the time. So, just you mentioned the Congo or Congo, that area. Over there, when they keep bees, they don't do they use treatments over there at all?
No, well, first of all, they can't afford it.
Okay,
And I mean, they can barely afford the hives themselves, the hive boxes, which is part of the reason why I was over there to kind of train them on tabar beekeeping because it requires very little means and it doesn't require precision woodworking skills. And they can make some with barrels or recycled materials, and the bars can also be trimmed to the specific bee space for the local bees, which very often in Africa they're actually a lot smaller than they are in the European honeybees. So I think it's better fit for countries that have not the options that we have here in the United States. So to talk about the non-access to treatments, what happens is that basically they have survivor stock when they keep bees over there.
yeah, it's like a side effect of just not having the stuff that we have. Um, so I mean, just that I have you here, I thought it'd be fun to just kind of hit you with the questions that I always get hit all the time with, and just see if you kind of react to them the same way that I do.
Okay.
And so one that I get all the time on all social media platforms is just, why don't you treat your bees? You know you're going to kill all the bees around you. So why don't you just treat your bees? What made you not want to treat them?
My initial reaction to you have to treat your bees was, well, why would I put insecticides or pesticides in a colony of insects? That didn't make any sense to me, logically speaking, and I really didn't want it in my honey. Plus, I wasn't sure of the impact. It couldn't be good for the bees, so I went to a lot of the beekeeping associations, and I was just kind of dumbfounded that everybody was saying you have to treat or your bees will die, basically. And so I started my own association because that's kind of what I do. And I treated, I think it was probably the first treatment free association in Texas, the Hayes County Beekeepers Association, which actually grew over the 5 years that followed to a really nice size. It's a very sturdy club with over 200 members and just kind of really active. But to answer those specific questions is also doesn't make any sense to me to apply pressure on the pest and propagate weak genetics, which is what we do when we treat. So I prefer to see which colonies are the fittest and keep those to breed from or to just kind of get swarms from or splits. And then the ones that are not make it, I'm not really. sad about letting them go, it could be by combining them. It could be by requeening them with survivor stock that I know is going to work well. And basically that eliminates those genetics, which is actually a little drastic, and it's a last resort for me. I'd rather use, what I do is I use integrated pest management, and basically the having a good education when you get started on beekeeping, knowing the life cycle of the bee and the biology of the colony, as well as that of the pests and the pathogens, so that you can better recognize them, is the first and most important level, in association with using cultural controls, which is using survivor stock, basically colonies that survive without and thrive without being treated. So that's kind of my approach to that. And I don't think that saying that if we don't treat our bees, will not only die but also damage other colonies is right, in my opinion. First of all, there's a lot more colonies out there that are treated and that also die. And what they do is that because they've been putting the pressure on the mites to be stronger, those are survivor mites that are going to get spread all around. So, as far as I'm concerned, that's a moot point, and it's actually something we should turn around and mention to other people, that the opposite might actually be true.
Okay, okay. So I hear you. I hear you. That's pretty good. So then normally what the next response to that is, but it's so cruel. You're killing these little girls. They're the little ladies. They're the there's little sweethearts. It's so cruel to let them die. And the humanization of bees to me is something that just gets under my skin. Calling my little girls, my little ladies, I immediately just my skin crawls. But what do you say to that? That it's cruel.
So, first of all, I'm right with you. Anthropomorphizing your bees, making them represent them as basically animals or human beings or mammals, basically, is not very representative of a colony of insects that's very complex, a superorganism that has all kinds of intricate mechanisms that we don't even begin to understand. It's not like a cat or a dog. It's not like we have to put insecticides on our animals to keep the fleas at bay, which is another argument I hear a lot about. Which, by the way, I don't even do that because I think it's toxic to my animals. So I put DE. I use diatomaceous earth, and fleas are not going to kill them to start with, but it's uncomfortable. So when it becomes an issue, I will go with something that's mechanical, not a toxic chemical. But letting them die is not what we do. And it's actually the opposite of what we do. We just keep the ones that are strong, and the ones that are not, they kind of get mixed in with the other ones, and we don't let them crash and do nothing. I think that this misunderstanding about treatment-free beekeeping is that it's basically you put your bees in a box and you let them die. As far as I'm concerned, or at least the way we do it, that's not the case. We taught ourselves. I mean, I work with Les, who's taught me, because he's got over 50 years of experience, and 30 of which are treatment-free. He's one of the first beekeepers that has been doing treatment-free in the United States. And so we teach ourselves what we need to recognize issues, and we can intervene if needed before they set in, before they become too bad. So I know there's two schools of thoughts in the treatment-free beekeeping community. Is one of them is, well, you just let them die and catch more, and that's fine. But that's, I think that in the end, if you want to recognize the issues that the colony of bees, if you go in there and if you see the symptoms, that does give you the opportunity to decide if you want to intervene or not. And that becomes your choice. But at the very least, we should be educated on what it is that the bees are doing, recognize when they're fit and when they're not fit, and just recognize all the symptoms of issues that can crawl in, and decide if we want to take care of it or not. It makes better beekeepers out of all of us, I think.
Yeah, my position on some of what you said there, there are a lot of conventional beekeepers who say that treatment-free beekeeping is you put them in a box and you never touch them or something like that. And of course, that's not true. That's silly. Mm-hmm. But also, letting them die is also something that I don't do. the colony never really gets to die for me, and at any point from April up until, I don't know, this time of the year, right up to this time of the year right now. Any kind of issue that I see, queenlessness or European foul brood or something like that, starvation, I'll try to fix those things.
Yeah.
Today, there are some things today. So once winter sets in, though, I'm going to, that's it. There's no
Oh
more
yeah.
doing anything for here. So they are going to die. There are some people, some of them are going. Today, in the past few days, I've checked, I don't know, 40 or 50 colonies. And there's one clear cut colony of mine that if I were to do nothing at all, it's going to die because it doesn't have food. It has a laying queen. She's not doing anything. I could just let them get robbed out, and that happens sometimes before I get there. But I will be doing kind of a rescue in a couple days where I'm just going to combine the rescue with them. So you don't really let them die over winter. Some of them are going to die. That's just how it is. And treating or not treating, I don't know. I do pretty well not treating them. So I mean, but they
Well,
can die, and I don't feel bad.
and to your point, the numbers for people that treat of losses and the number of losses for people that don't treat are either hand in hand, or I would argue that if you don't treat, I'm looking at much lower loss rates. So it could be argued that you let them die as well when you treat them, and they just suffer from catastrophic poisoning. In some cases, we've had people um, get nukes they thought were treatment free and put them in the pasture, and then come back and realize there was a pesticide poisoning. It turns out that the nukes had actually been treated with Apivar, I think it was, and then that chemical reacted with a innocuous fungicide in the field and created a toxic acute poisoning, which wouldn't have happened if they hadn't treated their bees, or if the person that had sold them the bees hadn't treated them. So that's one thing. The other thing is that those treatments, they take a toll. That's a trade-off, and there's issues such as colony, adult death, brood death, for fertility compromise for the queen, potentially queen death. There's all kinds of issues. It's harsh on the colonies in most cases, um, and that's true of all the chemical treatments and even the soft chemical treatments. There's something I will get on my soapbox about that, I'm sure, but oxalic acid or all formic acid, all the so-called organic acids are not organic in the sense of what you find at the grocery store. It simply means the opposite of inorganic. That means there's a bond between an atom of carbon and one of hydrogen in a specific fashion. And believe it or not, that doesn't mean that it's innocuous. Things like DDT, that's been banned because it was so bad. Naphthalene, the mothball, the toxic, chemical, and then the toxic agent and the toxic component of Agent Orange are all organic. Organic doesn't mean safe. It's all about the concentration of even natural products can be taking a toll and have unintended consequences in the colony. So that's something to keep in mind. But I know I have so much to say to you.
And as you're talking, I'm thinking of like everything that I want to say in the middle there of a few things that you said, and the weird kind of wordplay that goes on with some treating pillars of beekeeping, which I see a lot on these social media. Someone the other day had a video saying, you have to treat your bees or they're going to die. Formic acid is perfectly safe because it occurs in the beehives naturally. So a new person is going to think to themselves, oh, well, it's already in the hive, so it's perfectly fine if it's in there. But they don't know that it doesn't exist in those levels in a hive. You're talking about such a small percentage.
Exactly.
And like in my local Facebook beekeeping groups, all the groups I belong to besides the group that I'm an admin on, there are so many posts about people who used whatever treatment and now they're queenless and now they're
Or they've absconded.
yeah, and now they need a queen. So it's like you just risked first of all, you spent money to buy all these silly things to put into your hives. Now you're sitting there with 5 queenless colonies, and you're going to need to buy queens just to start the whole thing over again. So luckily, most people would try to not post that that kind of thing, but thank goodness some people are just naive enough. They post that, and it hopefully the right people see it. But this idea of things are safe because they exist in a hive at such a small percentage, are also safe because you're literally vaporizing crystals of that chemical and inundating your bees with it, and it's perfectly fine.
Well, and that's the point. Your point is exactly right on, because look at it this way. First of all, oxalic acid is an example. It's wood bleach, right? And you do find small amounts in spinach and in the honey, in small amounts. But when you have to apply it in the concentrations that are used as a treatment against the pests, it's so concentrated that you have to wear a gas mask, you have to wear skin protection gloves and everything. And if you breathe it in, it can actually calcify your lungs and just kind of burn them really bad, burn your skin. So the father of modern pharmacology, what's his name? Dr. Paracelsus. He said it the best: it's the concentration that makes the poison. It's the same thing with the essential oils. If you put essential oils on your skin, actually to a lesser degree because it's not as concentrated, but you can't do that. You have to use a carrier oil, right? So that's concentration is bad. But don't get me started on the essential oils, because there's so much that go along with it, including the interferences with the chemical messages and the pheromones. And it's absorbed into the wax, and it just kind of interferes with communication, efficient communication, and it also coats their guts if they're absorb it, and interferes with digestion. So that's not innocuous. Those stuff, they don't belong in a hive. And I think that the principle of not putting anything in a hive that doesn't belong is probably the safest approach, because the first thing is to do no harm, right? And we don't understand exactly what's going on in those colonies, and we inject all those chemicals and those substances that the bees don't put in those concentrations, even for the ones that are sometimes present in, and for the purpose of controlling a pest. And that's the other aspect of that, is that we are doing it to do the job of the bees, which is to find ways to keep those pests under control and to live with them and thrive with them in harmony, in a way, in a symbiotic relationship. And so when we treat for the purpose of keeping those pests and pathogens, those diseases at bay, or decrease them at all costs, or even potentially, even, that's crazy to me, eliminate them, just like if we had to put our bees in a bubble kind of a thing, then we are doing the bees a disservice, because they are weaker, and the pests are receiving the pressure to get stronger. So I think in the long run, we do the opposite. But to go back to what we were talking about, Africa, they didn't have access to those treatments. And very quickly, yes, they did lose bees at the beginning, but very quickly they bounced back, and their bees are just living with it, and they're thriving, let me tell you. Whereas here, we've been doing it for 30 years and it hasn't worked. So what's the definition of insanity? Keep doing the same thing and just expect it to create a different outcome? I don't know.
Yeah, well, I mean, back to essential oils for a minute. The misleading word essential in that also kind of probably confuses some people, because they'll think essential, well then the bees need it, even though that's not why it's called essential oil. But something else you mentioned earlier was that treating beekeepers have a very similar loss. I don't even like to say loss, but loss rates are maybe even more than people who don't treat. I don't really know for sure, but for me, I've said, for people who watch me all the time, they know that it's like a broken record. You cannot compare survival of bees that are not treated,
Yeah,
because it's not survival on the other side. What you're talking about is simply alive bees in the spring. Mm-hmm. So I would rather have, 60% true survival, untreated, survival bees than 95% of bees that have been kept alive that I'm going to have to keep doing the same thing to every single year. And yeah, so it's like apples to bananas, really.
Oranges, yes.
Yeah,
And
so
if you look at it, I think the national average is between 30 and 40%, and that includes all the treated and the non-treated that are being reported. But like 90% of those are treated. So in our apiaries, we've got anywhere between 5 and 15% of losses, depending on the conditions in the season. We had a really hard summer dearth, and we had 2 years ago a really hard winter in Texas, as it made national news. And so that's when we had our higher losses. We tried to overwinter smaller colonies, and that didn't work that winter because that was especially harsh. But usually we can, and so our numbers fluctuate way below the national average anyway, right? So whether it's treated or non-treated for the colony losses. So I mean, not only is it apples to oranges when you're comparing colonies that are treated and not treated, but also let's be realistic and realize that treating doesn't solve it's the problem. It's not a silver bullet, and I argue that it actually is delaying the solutions, which is keeping bees that are local survivor stock that are from your area. I know you like to catch a lot of swarms and get the bees that you find in your area instead of purchasing bees that come from out of state, and I'm totally with that. Yeah.
Another thing, also, I don't know, maybe tell me your thoughts on it, but it kind of like for me and you, we have kind of a lot of bees relative to the average, normal, everyday backyard beekeeper,
How
and a
many
lot
you
of
got?
it, huh?
How many you got now?
Me somewhere in the 80s. I don't know exactly.
That's
I'm
pretty
trying
good, yeah.
pretty good. I mean, I sold a ton just because I'm trying to stay in the 80s. I was at 80 last winter, um, but anyway, most people have fewer.
Yeah,
So
like maybe like under 10 or 20 usually, yeah.
and the tendency is to look up to people with a ton of hives or ton of colonies, and look up to commercial beekeepers and try to emulate their way of doing things for no reason, because they only have 3 to 10 colonies, which that's so easy to bounce back from even a 70% death rate out of 10. Let's say you have 10, you only want to have 10. You can lose 70% of your bee, you can quote unquote lose, but is it really a loss when you have the best left over, all things being equal? You can bounce back from that so easily from splitting and catching 2 swarms. It's just too easy. So a lot of people just need to stop thinking like they're Cayman Reynolds or Bob Binney or somebody. They need to keep every single thing alive. It's just greed. That's their bread and butter. So they need to keep these large amounts of bees alive. They never really tell you, at least that I know. I don't really watch them, but I don't know what their quote unquote survival rates are or how many bees they have left in the spring. They have 0 survivors, in my opinion. But yeah, this idea of looking up to commercial 10,000 operation beekeepers is silly.
So that's one of my biggest arguments when I talk and teach. We do apprenticeships and classes and education a lot because we're trying to broadcast the message that one of our main argument is exactly this. Backyard beekeepers don't need to be keeping their bees the same way commercial beekeepers do. They are transporting their bees across the country. They're putting hundreds of colonies in one space, so that's what they feed. Their constraints and goals are completely different than those of backyard beekeepers. And 95% of the beekeepers out there are actually backyard beekeepers, hobbyists, homesteaders. So the commercial beekeepers, they do things the way they do, and I'm not going to throw a stone because they have completely different paradigms as far as beekeeping is concerned. I don't agree with some of the things, but their livestock, agricultural, big companies that are doing beekeeping for different reasons and with different constraints. Backyard beekeepers have the choice. First of all, they don't have. I know that that's my particular preference, but they don't have to keep their bees in Langstroth boxes, which are conventional commercial beekeeping boxes. that were designed for the purpose of stacking up and transporting and just kind of satisfying those requirements from commercial beekeepers. That's why we kind of promote thicker walls and hopefully horizontal beekeeping for different reasons for backyard beekeepers, because we think it's easier for them to know where the bird's nest is and to manage them. It's less intimidating, and we find it's a lot less stressful on the bees. They're a lot calmer and a lot healthier. And we can compare because we have a lot of both, right? So we have the numbers that, it's not just an opinion at that point. But, commercial beekeepers, watching commercial beekeepers channels, you might learn some things, but overall, I think it's not because you have a large operation and a large YouTube channel that necessarily the things that you promote are good for backyard beekeepers, which is the vast majority of us. So I agree with you there, and I think we should look more into just in the integrated pest management strategies that we can apply as smaller scale beekeepers. We have that luxury. And I think that what matters in the end is to keep our bees as healthy as possible without intervening as much. I think that when we intervene and we mess with them, it's actually more stressful on them, including those pollen patties, those
I was just about to say pollen patties.
and packing them with sugar syrup and potentially even taking all their honey and replacing it with sugar syrup. All this stuff is not good for the bees.
Yeah, I was just about to bring up pollen patties because I have just in my local area, local club, local Facebook groups, somebody be brand new and I'll see them installing a package and putting a pollen patty on top of some bees that don't even have comb yet. And then 2 weeks later, why do I have all these beetles here? Now that I have beetle traps in there with oil, and then it's with Swiffer sheets and all kinds of stuff, and I'm like, it's just become a toy box full of just stuff in there all the time. I mean, it's comical to me and then for me, I'm just cracking lids. I see a beetle here and there, but I just don't. I've never touched a pollen patty in my area of Pennsylvania. We're not the desert like you guys have or anything. Mm-hmm. Pollen is just always there. I mean, sometimes there's dead outs that just have a whole box of pollen underneath because there's just too much. So putting pollen patties on is silly, and then all the beetle traps afterwards, and next thing you know, they're just getting slimed.
Yeah, no, I'm completely with you. There's a couple of things. First of all, the usefulness of the pollen patties or the pollen supplements. There's research out there, and there's a great synthesis of the research that's out there that's been done by Emily Nordyke. I don't know if you've read it recently. She was talking about basically the fact that when there's natural pollen available, those pollen supplements don't do anything good for the colonies. It's only when there's no pollen whatsoever available. And believe it or not, we are in a hot, area, but we did have pollen all year round, pretty much. So that can actually have unintended consequences, like when you feed them in the fall so that you boost up the numbers, they actually are exhausted in the spring, and there's a negative return on investment there. It has some toxicity in some cases. There's all kinds of things that don't show that it's good for the bees, and it can actually be negative. The other aspect of things is, for example, you feed your bees in the winter pollen patties to get them started strong in the spring. Well, there's several things that can happen. You can have them brewed up so much that if there's a cold snap that comes through, they're going to go through all their carbohydrate reserves, their honey or nectar, trying to keep that brood warm, and they're actually going to exhaust themselves, and they can die from that. If they don't, and they make it through such circumstances, then all of a sudden you have a humongous population early in the season that leads to swarming conditions. And then you lose your mated queen, who leaves at a time where there's no drones available, and you're left with a virgin queen that's got no mates to go along with. So you end up with an unmated or poorly mated queen when you're on the other side of it. So, I mean, those are some of the things that people don't always think about. But I'm with you with the small hive beetles. That could be an issue as well, especially if you give too much. The other thing that I don't like about pollen patties and regular supplementation is that it messes with their cycles. There's a cycle of expansion when the nectar flow hits, and then a cycle of contraction when the dearth sets in. And in Texas, we have a large one in the spring, and then we have a smaller one in the fall. And when you keep feeding them, especially protein, but also in some instances, some of those nectar, because we do find pollen in nature, you artificially keep them in high numbers of brood. And that is an issue because a brood break is actually a natural brood break. We're not talking about imposing a brood break on the bees when we want to. We let the bees decide when they want to contract and when they want to expand, because that's what they know what to do, and they know how to follow the cycles. They do what's best. But if we intervene and keep them in brood, that rejuvenating cycle, that cleansing cycle that the brood break is, doesn't happen. And then what happens instead is you have a lot of brood, and what do mites need to reproduce? Capped brood, right? So you're giving them what they need to explode in population. The brood breaks allow you to actually keep those mite numbers in check. I think that the statistics I've heard, the research that was done said that if you don't feed your bees, the population of mites may increase in a factor of 8-fold or 12-fold. I cannot remember. And then if you do feed them, that increases in like the 200s. So you really, what you're doing is you're breeding mites.
Yeah, it's weird because I'm not anti-feeding syrup, when it's necessary. And I did feed for a decade, really, until this past winter was the first year I said, I'm just not feeding. I'm going to just see what happens if I let 80 colonies just go at each other's throats. And it didn't happen. Right.
Yeah.
Like I had 2 colonies that did get robbed. They were big too. But when I got in there, I realized there was something wrong. They were laying worker colonies. So it's like,
something's usually wrong when that happens, or they contract too much and they can't protect the nest.
Yeah, both of them did that. They both got robbed. All that honey got redistributed around my yard, and I had 70% on the dot of survival, which maybe some big beekeepers would laugh at that. But when you're not treating whatsoever and you didn't spend a penny on feeding, I love it. I had 56 coming out of spring just here at home, and those got split. I mean, so many ways. I was so far ahead, spending zero money, and this year I'm not doing it again. And as I was telling you earlier, I went through a bunch of colonies, and I actually have more stores on my hives this year than I did when I fed. I used to put out swimming pools full of sugar syrup, and it would cause a bunch of robbing. It would bring the whole county to my yard of bees. It would probably brood them up. It just ended up, I just had much worse time feeding than I do now from not feeding. So I might never feed again. I mean, I just don't see why I would feed.
So we went through the same thing. And first of all, once the colonies are established, very often they don't need any help whatsoever. Sometimes when they're less established in their first year, that's when it's kind of a little trickier until they reach that critical mass of size of population. That tends to be a little dicier, but we don't feed either. The thinking here is that if you keep feeding your bees, it's no longer an emergency, so we only go with emergency feeding if need be. And actually, we've not really done that this past year either, because we are testing just not feeding at all. And we haven't lost any more colonies than when we did feed in emergency situations only. So the other thing is that if you're feeding emergency only, but if you keep doing that, that's when it's no longer emergency, and then it's just kind of at some point becomes poor management, right? If you're or you're not in the right area and your bees. I mean, there's a concept of carrying capacity in your area. If you have too many colonies and not enough forage, they're never going to thrive. And so at that point, you can artificially boost them with some feeding, but what are you doing really? You could make more honey if you trim down the number of colonies and let them settle naturally to the carrying capacity of your area. to the intensity levels that match that carrying capacity. And then you're going to have stronger colonies that are not going to need feeding anyway, and that are going to produce a lot more because they'll be healthier and stronger. So there's that aspect of things as well.
Yeah, I think that I don't know what I was thinking for all that time, but it would become July and August, and to me that was the time that you started to feed because
Because
that's
they
when you're
tell
supposed
you,
to.
it's like, this is your recipe. And
Yeah,
this
and I
time,
finally,
it doesn't matter what the size of your colony is or if they have food in there. You know, a lot of the beekeeping, especially the commercial beekeepers, will tell you, this is when I do my. Yes, that's what they do because they're a business and they have thousands of hives. And that's kind of like the way they work their calendar. But that's not the way the bees work it. And definitely it changes every year. And it's based also on the size of your population. It's a much more nuanced um, um, world than that of the commercial beekeepers, really.
yeah, and the amount of late swarming that I had back when I fed, starting in late July during the dearth, um, I would just have swarms hanging in the trees all late in the year. I have not had that for 2 years. I haven't had any swarms in my yard past July, none at all. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and and also I like I said, I already said it, but the robbing only happens to colonies that already have a problem. All my other colonies,
Mm-hmm.
they just have bees totally covering the entrance, and
Mm-hmm.
every little hole that they chewed somewhere, there's just bees covering it. There's no way bees are going to be able to rob those bees. They're strong, and they don't have the scent of fresh sugar coming in during a dearth period when the whole neighborhood is going to smell that and they're going to come after it. So I
Mm-hmm.
love the decision of just not feeding. If I lose some bees to starvation,
I agree with you. I think that's where we are now as well. Maybe usually if it's not that they necessarily directly die of starvation because it's always like nice larger colonies in the area that are thriving. So what it is that it's a lack of fitness is what is their demise usually, unless we're intervening and doing something that's causing them to have issues. But if we did keep all the colonies alive and prop them up artificially, we would have bees everywhere. In the wild, if we keep in mind that when a colony swarms, that swarm has an average rate of success of only 25%. So if we're above that, we're already doing better than what nature does by them, right? So I'm not feeling too bad about this.
yeah. And I do wonder, like you said, I've thought about that too. I hear these stories about the dream world that beekeeping was pre like 1985 or something, where just no bees ever died. And this guy stood up at a bee meeting one time. He's been keeping bees for like 70 years, and he said it was so rare for a colony to die that they actually had like a funeral. I was just like shaking my head the whole time. But can you imagine every single every single colony
Yeah.
leaving every year and then splitting them and them swarming? We'd be up to our necks in bees. So I think that whole um, beekeeping survival needs to be in the 90s like it always was. I think it's baloney. I think there was a lot more bees dying than people would have us believe.
Well, and I mean, I am not saying it was not easier because I wasn't there. I do not
Yeah.
know. But when you look at the books and the literature, it's not agreeing with what that gentleman was saying, right? So, Brother Adams and all the old beekeeping books, that's not every time this history of nature. Yes, it's more stressful now because of stressors like monoculture and pesticides and changes in temperatures and just kind of environmental stressors that are probably higher. And honestly, yes, the mites initially took a toll, but if we had left the bees kind of fend for themselves in the beginning, the wisdom out there and the research that says basically it would have taken about 3 years for that to stabilize. But instead, we chose to kind of go at it and just prop up all those colonies and there's commercial beekeeper here in Texas that has done it. He's let all his colonies die when it first was the arrival of the mites, and they went from like 2-3 thousand colonies down to like just a handful. and then he started breeding from those survivors, and he's now, selling thousands of nukes every year in bees and queens. So I mean, I think it would be probably better for the bees if we stopped messing with them. And the other thing that happens very often is that beekeepers mess with their bees a lot more than is good for the bees. I find that the bees that we leave alone the most, keeping an eye on them, just kind of, seeing if they're there or whatever, they tend to do better than the ones where are always in trying to figure out, some alternative, some ulterior motive for ourselves, beekeepers, that we use colonies of bees for ag valuation services in Texas. So we're always trying to make sure we have the right numbers. And so sometimes we try to do a split, and we leverage the swarming instinct of the colony that's growing swarm cells, but sometimes we miscalculate, and so we put them in a position where it's a little bit more stressful. We try not to do that, but it happens, and those colonies do better when we help them a little bit, because it was our fault to start with. But the general consensus between Les and I is that the more we mess with them, the less healthy they are usually.
Yeah, my bees in the log that I have here, they're now going into their third winter since I've had them, and I've obviously never touched them or been in them. They've swarmed, 6 times this year, like 5 times last year, and I have a whole line of bees in boxes from them. But yeah, they even almost died this year. They seemed to go queenless. They had a bunch of weird looking drones falling out. They had no really not much activity whatsoever. And then one of my other little swarms just went in and combined with them on their own, and now they're exploding again. So that'll be a good one in the spring.
Yeah. Well, when they make it and turn around like that, that's usually what happens. The other thing I wanted to mention is I've had very small colonies, and Langstroth is not my favorite, especially if it's got foundation on it. But so sometimes they get a little stressed in. So I've had some of those very small colonies, and what I do is I put them in winter nukes. They're 2-inch lumber, 5-frame nuke boxes. So basically, I compress them as much as possible, and I find that they go through a lot less resources, and they tend to overwinter a lot better because of it, even if they were struggling in the fall. So there's something to be said. I know that a lot of the beekeepers out there know this. When you compress your colonies and you have bees that are covering, the ratio of bees to drone comb being higher is going to make them usually healthier in the long term. But also I find that the thermal mass of the thicker wood really avoids those sharp fluctuations in temperatures, and it allows the bees to not go through as much of their resources, because they're not expending as much energy trying to maintain their balance. And this is also why you don't want to feed them so that they have brood, because when they have brood in the winter, they have to keep those temperatures around 95-ish Fahrenheit, which requires a lot of energy. Whereas when they're broodless, they don't have to expend as much, and they can live off of their resources in their fat bodies for a lot longer. So there's also a thought.
Okay, hey, I had one. I know you have to get going soon, probably about 10 more minutes, but I had a question about something that I get a lot. Is, well, you were in Africa, so you got to see the bees that were never treated, and you mentioned that they were smaller. Did you mean that the colonies were smaller, or the bees themselves were smaller?
And I mean, the bees were smaller, and they had smaller bee space and smaller cell sizes. That's another thing that we do, is we use natural comb, because we believe that the natural cell sizes allow them to express their needs the way they have to, right? You're going to have larger cells at the top, you're going to have smaller cells for the workers, and the space is going to be in Africa a lot closer because they're smaller as well. But the natural comb is, I think, much better for them, and it also allows them to communicate more efficiently through those vibrations. And in the winter here in the US, right, when they're trying to cluster and they've got that plastic in the midrib of the comb, that's really not making it easy for them to stay warm. But yeah, in Africa, they're a lot smaller, but the bees were, but the colonies that I worked with were very large. If you give them the size of cavity that a tabar hive provides, they would fill it up nicely
Well,
and warm. Yeah.
the argument that I hear from people is, oh well, those bees are able to survive without treatments because they're smaller, but they did have a die off at the beginning, just like any other place. That's what I did an interview with someone a few months ago who's from South Africa, and he told me that they, when varroa mites arrived there, they never did treat, and
Is it
there
Mark?
was, hmm?
Was it Mark?
I don't even remember his name now, but his he said there was a major die off at first,
Hmm.
but they just stuck with it, and now they never talk about varroa mites at all.
Yeah,
And then
that's
with
what
your,
I'm saying. Yeah.
I'm not sure. I'm geographically just not great, but the Congo, I'm not sure where
So
that is
you
in.
got so let me see if I can do it backwards. You got Africa that's going like this. It's like a big head at the top, and it's at the kind of the corner, the curve
Okay,
right there. Yeah.
so both areas had small bees that also still died from varroa mites at first. So I don't think that the argument. I don't think that someone's saying, arguing with me saying, oh yeah, they survive now because they're small, but they did die when they were small too. They just were selected for survival because in one area of South Africa, they had the means to buy the treatments, they just didn't want to. And in
Right.
one area, they didn't have the means, and they both got the same result, which is they don't need to really talk about mites at all.
Right. And it's not necessarily because those bees are smaller. We find that the bees that are kept on natural comb in the United States are smaller as well because that's the size. So foundation actually was promoted for commercial beekeeping purposes to make larger bees. The thought was that they would bring more honey because they were bigger and they could fly further. The opposite is actually kind of true because now you have fewer bees per comb. You have bigger bees, it takes more space, so your population is actually lower with larger bees, and it turns out that they're not bringing in more honey, and it is better for the bees to be smaller the way that they want to be. So I mean, I don't think that them being smaller is just part of Africa. Yes, they're a bit smaller in Africa, but in all, it's I don't know if it's true where you are, but the bees that we keep in our hives that have been in natural comb for a long time are smaller, partly because we do have some Africanized genetics in Texas. But I wonder if you see the same thing over there where you are, and if you, I don't even know if you keep foundation in your hives or if you do natural comb at all. I don't even know.
Um, some of my favorite colonies are they've been foundationless for a long time, and my bees are so tiny that they actually look like bottle flies. Like they're so small.
Yeah.
Measuring the cells, they're average between 4.5 millimeters and like 4.7 millimeters in the brood nest area. So they're really small bees, and when they swarm, I love it because I put them right into a box with zero foundation, and they just. I mean, I don't think they can possibly get any smaller. I think they're at their limit. Like they're as natural as they can be. But those are
Mhm.
my favorite bees. I've had them for since 2016. I think they were in a fallen tree in the woods, um, way out in the forest. So I still have those bees and many of their descendants. And yeah, they're tiny. I mean, they're really small. People will come here and look at them and say, "Man, those look like actual little tiny flies, but they're bees. They're honeybees, but they're
Yeah,
really
and
small."
we see the same thing. I think that partly what I mentioned helps with their smaller size because you get a larger population. But I mean, if you think about it, my thinking is that on larger bees, you have more opportunities for the mites to go and find ways to feed. And on smaller bees, it's harder and it's probably easier for them to groom those mites it's easier to find them, right? So I don't know. It's kind of,
Yeah, I
I
mean,
don't have any research backing that up.
there's people that I know, like from Tim Ives from the Treatment Free Group. He uses strictly right cell, which is about as big as you can get. I mean, the only bigger thing might be Acorn Foundation, but he uses the biggest cells that there are in the brood nest and everywhere, and he has really good success. I can put I can put bees, average bees on tiny cells that were already built in combs from my small bees, and they could still die. I think it contributes, but it's definitely not. Definitely doesn't tell. It's not a silver bullet, like you said. You can have bad bees, give them small cells, and they'll crash, or you can have good, well-selected bees on
Yeah.
big cells, like Tim Ives' bees, and have great success. So it's
Yeah.
a thing. I think it's just really interesting. I don't really attach too much of my success or failure to the cell size, but it is interesting when you get these really tiny bees, and you can think to yourself, like, that's what they're supposed to look like.
Right. And it's not so much that I want tiny bees, as I want them to build to the sizes that they need, because they're going to do the best job of deciding, rather than us imposing upon them a specific pattern, a specific layout, a specific size without, there's no thought put into the cells that we impose upon them in conjunction with their health. It's all for the beekeeper, really. And I'm not sure it's based on actual research that it's optimized for the bees. It was always for the beekeepers, and the goal was to actually make them the biggest possible. And so now you have those unnaturally big bees sometimes that you have to deal with. But I just prefer our bees on. So when we get sometimes nukes or bees that are on foundation in our hands, we try to cycle that out in interspace foundation less, so that they can, at least in the brood's nest, have foundation less, so that they can have the cell sizes that they need. Whereas, the argument very often is, if I don't use foundation, then I cannot extract my honey in an extractor. It's more fragile to manipulate. But it doesn't have to be one all or the other. It could be a mix of both, where you have more natural comb in your bird's nest and more foundation on the outside where you've got the honey. I don't know.
Yeah, that's what I do. I use foundation definitely in my upper honey boxes most of the time, and then sometimes I'll have some comb, some just bare frames for comb honey, and then sometimes in the very bottom box, I'll have a plastic foundation on each outside. But most of the time, I try to keep at least the majority of it is just foundationless in the brood nest. And you can also, I've extracted foundationless frames many times, put them in the extractor full speed just about, and as long as they have a little bit of age to them, they hold up just fine. I don't have any problem.
Right. So I was just telling you, can stay a little bit longer until 7:10 if you need me to.
Okay. I was like, okay, thanks for coming. I was thinking
I know.
But just, you can tell us a little more about you were saying you had a podcast. I've heard of the Hive Jive before, but how is that going? I haven't listened to podcasts forever. Is that something that you kind of take over now, or do you do a special segment?
So John Swan, who is another Texas master beekeeper, started the Hive Jive podcast as an adventure for brand new beekeepers, and he doesn't take sides, and he explains a lot of things the way he does things. But we're really good friends, and he started talking to me about treatment free and all that stuff, and so he wanted to add a natural. He knows my passion for the topic, so he added a natural beekeeping corner to the Hive Jive. So every month I kind of try to talk about what treatment free is, and that's published on the Hive Jive podcast. So it's not my podcast, and I don't agree necessarily with all the techniques that are discussed on the Hive Jive, but on the Natural Beekeeper corner, we focus on treatment free.
Cool. All right. Did you have any questions for me? We've never talked before, and
I thought you were going to be picking on me.
No,
I'm like, that was not that bad. Yes.
No, I have fun talking about bees. I know that there was one time we talked about something, and I think it was just a misunderstanding.
I think I will always remember, because you did bring up a good point, and I was like, well, the bees, they always build from the top down, and you're like, well, here's a picture. They were building. It was wax comb being built up from the bottom of a tree. I think that was the main thing we were discussing.
Well, that's the thing about bees, and I say it a lot.
Not to say always.
Right. That's what I was going to say. To speak in what do you even call that kind of language, saying they'll always do this or they'll never do that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutes. it's so silly because you only need one example of one case of that thing, and now you look like a dummy, if you say that. So I'm constantly hearing, queens never do this, bees never forage on this plant, and I'll just run through my videos on my phone. Here it is. Here's a bee on this plant
Yeah.
foraging. So that always kind of annoys me. It should be, in my experience, I have not seen this thing. Even
Right, right. Oh, and I totally agree with you. It's just hard sometimes to remember. Where are you? Oh, there you are. To remember because, it's easy to go down that slope. But once you've managed, many, many you've seen thousands of colonies either in boxes or you've done some removals and you've seen what the bees do in nature, you realize there's not one size fits all. And that's why it's so silly for people to also say if you don't treat your bees they will die, because it takes only one counter example, logically speaking, to tell you you're wrong. And that's why I like to post my warrior hive that's 8 years old, never fed, never inspected, and it's thriving. And just that one example is enough to tell me that that statement is wrong.
it should be right, but that doesn't stop people from
Hmm.
just repeating it over and over again. Because I had somebody on, TikTok of all places, where I would spend way too much time making TikTok videos, watching TikTok. But every time I see, here we are, it's that time of the year. If you don't treat your bee, it's always somebody brand new. They always have a year or two under their belt, and they're telling people that their bees are going to die. And of course, here I come in the comments, saying, well, that's just not true. It's either fear or greed. That's the only two reasons to treat, or both. You're
Hmm.
either afraid of something you've never done, you you're just irrationally fearful. You don't know what's going to happen because you've never done it, or you're just greedy and you think you need to keep the most bees you can possibly have because you're trying to protect an investment, which is not wrong. I mean, it's not wrong to protect an investment like your car or your house, but to prop up bees so much that they become so fragile and dependent on you kind of harms the bees around you. So I'm against that.
Well, and that's where I have a little bit of a it's also I was going to say ignorant, but it's not a good word. I would say a lack of understanding, um, not knowing that there's other things you can do, and not knowing that those treatments don't necessarily keep those bees alive. But the point is, a lot of B schools, a lot of classes, a lot of the stuff that's being taught everywhere, including from the commercial beekeeper channels and a lot of the beekeepers associations, and even some of the master beekeeper programs, will tell you the same thing. So I feel like it's hard for people to understand that there's another way to keep bees, and that actually they should think through what it is instead of prophylactically treating their bees just because. That's the other pet peeve of mine, is that a lot of times that integrated pest management pyramid, which has the chemicals all the way at the top, and I would argue we shouldn't use at all if we want to, unless we want to propagate genetics that shouldn't be propagating. But even if you are treating, that's at the top of that pyramid. It shouldn't be done. You shouldn't flip it around and start treating without even knowing, without even just understanding when. I mean, some people do just do it just without counting mites, just without. I don't count mites and I don't promote counting mites, but even if you do and you treat without even counting your mites, that's even worse, I guess what I'm saying.
Yeah, I just recently saw a video where someone said, I didn't test, I don't care about tests, and I'm treating everybody no matter
Yeah.
what. And it's just, I don't get it. Yeah, I've never counted. Counting, I don't think that is a good indicator that something will live, because
Nope.
and the thresholds have been lowered. So I heard somewhere, because I
Thank
wasn't
you.
really around, but I know back when I started,
It used
the
to be like
threshold was like
30 or something. Yes.
something really high, 30. Then it went down to 20. Then to now it's like, if you see three, you're supposed to do, the barrage of treatments,
Yeah.
every third day, 7 times, and then do that whole thing 3 times a year. It's like, wow. Um, and
The goal is
somehow,
not the complete eradication of the pests. The goal is fitness. And I think that trading actually prevents people from understanding what the bees are doing. It's just not helping the
Well,
bees.
imagine if there was a way to eradicate the pest. Let's say someone could snap their fingers and completely wipe mites out. Um, how long would that even last? I mean, they would just be right back. So there's no sense in even
Something
keeping
else would be,
that
you
pipe
know.
dream in their head. And for the last thing before you go, because I know you got to go 1 minute.
Mhm.
Another pet peeve of mine, because you were telling me about your pet peeve, is I think when we talk about bees, we can just say mites, right? We can just say mites. When I hear the word, or if you want to say varroa, okay, throw that in. But I'm hearing a lot of beekeepers, it seems like a fear tactic to say varroa destructor mites, and they
I
say it.
know it is a psychological a tool, is what it
It's
is.
it's kind of scary sounding to somebody. They hear destructor, and they get all like, "Oh my god, it's going to destroy all my bees."
Mhm.
You could just it's a fear tactic, and
And the
I don't
mite
respect.
bombs.
Yeah, I don't respect anyone who says varroa destructor every time. They could just say mites. Like we're
Or
not
mites.
worried about tracheal mites anymore or dust mites. They're
Mhm.
mites. We know what you're talking about. To go the extra to put out the extra effort to say varroa destructor every time is so silly.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's a scare tactic, just like the mite bomb expression is. And as far as I'm concerned, I talk about tongue in cheek because I think those fear mongering strategies are just kind of manipulation, emotional manipulation. But as a tongue in cheek, I was like, if you're going to talk about mite bomb, let's talk about drone treated mite bombs, right? Because you end up with stronger mites that are, when they die, just as much as the others, going to get spread around. But also you have drones with poor quality sperm and poor genetics because they can't fend off for themselves. But then those contribute to the spermatheca of the queens that they're mating with in a disproportionate amount because those sperms are going to be either poor quality or unviable. So now you have a queen that's mated with those drones, and then she's got poor sperm in her bag that's going to last her for how long, right? So I think that, between that and the poor genetics that you're bringing in, that's a much larger concern for me.
Yeah, we have to come up with a name for that, like genetic dud bombs or something like that.
Yeah.
But
Treated bombs.
treating bombs. But thank you very much for coming on my little program here. I had a good time. I'll put the links for just about anything and everything you do in the description here for anybody who wants to
Thank you.
check all those things out. So thanks for coming on. And
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for having me. And I hope that you can come on to our either the chat with Mindful Beekeepers. I know you go there, but we want to do more interviews on our YouTube channel as well. It'd be mindful. So we'd love to have you. And always good talking to you, Bruce.
all right, take care. Have a good one.
You as well. Thanks. Bye.
All right, thanks everybody for watching. I thought that was a pretty interesting interview, and I'd love to hear your comments, what you think. Leave it down below. Have a good night. See you on the next one.